Welcome back to the Standard Podcast, and I'm Mark Blunden. Officials believe there are no survivors after a plane carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members collided midair with a US Army helicopter over Washington, D.C. In this clip, an air traffic controller tells the Black Hawk call sign PAT-25 to pass behind CRJ, that's the American Airlines flight.
PAT-25, get the CRJ in flight. PAT-25, pass behind this CRJ.
Did you see that?
American Airlines Flight 5342 from Wichita, Kansas crashed into the Potomac River following the collision. The plane, a Bombardier CRJ700, was approaching Reagan Washington National Airport around 9 p.m. local time on Wednesday, or around 2 a.m. GMT, when the collision occurred with a Black Hawk helicopter on a training exercise. Among the dead are members of the American figure skating team travelling on the commercial flight and 3 soldiers on board the helicopter. The Standard Podcast is joined by Graham Braithwaite, Professor of Safety and Accident Investigation at Cranfield University. Would you be able to tell us what we know so far about this tragedy and the circumstances around it?
This appears to be a really tragic mid-air collision on approach to a very busy airport, as we have a military aircraft that's crossing the path of a civilian aircraft as it's descending towards the airport. And we need to understand, how did those 2 aircraft end up in such close proximity, and were there any opportunities to have prevented that collision?
What is that competition for space? How crowded are the skies now? And is presumably a big challenge for air traffic control. Would that be dealt with by 2 separate military and civilian services, or is it all under one umbrella?
So for an area of air traffic like over Washington, there'll be a bit of a mixture, likely of people controlling airspace. So clearly around airports, that's a civil domain, and there will be coordination between them and any other military air traffic control, and people will be following procedures and lanes and so on to keep aircraft separated. But there are times when those traffic lanes are quite close, and the altitude at which people are flying becomes really very critical. And in this case, on the approach path to an airport, where that approach path is defined, it's generally a 3-degree slope at which aircraft descend towards that. And clearly any other traffic needs to keep very much away from that zone, and that appears to have been what's gone wrong in this particular case. But as for why, that will take quite some time to figure out.
Do you think the height, this 400 feet, which is really quite low, isn't it, is going to be of significance in the investigation?
I think at this stage, investigators will tend to be looking wider and wider rather than trying to just focus in on a particular area. So I guess one of the things we need to understand is, can we figure out what each crew thought, what the air traffic controller thought? Now, clearly we have an air traffic controller who has survived this accident, but who may be deeply traumatized by it. So just figuring out what everybody understood at the time is always a challenge, because now everybody with hindsight is seeing things with a clarity that maybe wasn't available at the time. And then trying to understand how factors such as the lighting at the time, were the military pilots flying on night vision goggles, for example, and did they spot the aircraft that they thought they'd spotted when they acknowledged the other traffic? All of those things will take some time to piece together. There can be no presumption, and also it may be that we can't answer some of those questions with the crew of both aircraft deceased.
In terms of what the aviation safety systems will do in these circumstances, could you help us understand how that would work? And would that be, again, different for civilian and military aircraft, or is it broadly the same sort of safety or early warning system that both cockpits would have? And then what would be the series of events?
We try and make aircraft as conspicuous as possible. And by that, I mean easy for another aircraft to identify, or for air traffic to identify where that aircraft is. Now, for a commercial aircraft like the American Airlines one here, it would carry both a transponder and a system that it can use to see other aircraft. And we call that TCAS, and that's about alerting us to other traffic. And if it spots that other traffic and there is a likelihood of potential conflict, then it will tell one aircraft to climb, the other aircraft to descend, and so on. Now, the problem here could be that the military aircraft may not have carried the same system in terms of conspicuity. I don't know. That will be one of the first questions to ask. So could they see each other? But also the confusing factor here is that around an airport, you have a lot of aircraft. And so the potential is that you're getting a lot of warnings about aircraft that are close, but operating legitimately and safely in that same area. So one of the questions will be, was that system in any way inhibited because of where it was on the approach? It was so close to the airport. What you don't want is a nuisance warning from an aircraft that might be on the ground or nearby. So the question will be, did the system work the way it was supposed to work? Or was this a particular set of really unusual circumstances where, because the conflicting aircraft was so low, that the system didn't work the way in which it was anticipated? So there's a lot to try and untangle there.
Let's go to a quick break. Coming up in part 2, could transforming more car parking bays into drop zones for e-bikes turn London into an Amsterdam-style cyclist's paradise? If you're new here, please do make sure to hit follow and give us a rating. Welcome back. The chief executive of Lime has laid out plans for transforming more London car parking bays into e-bike drop zones. It's part of a £20 million investment blitz and a response to complaints about the menace of dumped hire cycles littering the capital's pavements. In an interview with the London Standard's transport editor Ross Lydall, Wayne Ting also set out his vision for getting more Londoners out of the car and onto the saddle to create, as he called it, another Amsterdam. And Ross joins us now. Ross, interesting report on Thursday. New bays for e-bikes. How would this work?
I've been speaking with Wayne Ting, who is the chief executive of Lime globally. He had flown in from America for some high-level meetings here in London. And as one of the headlines from the interview was the fact that Lime is investing £20 million in its operation in London, includes offering London boroughs £5 million to set up parking bays for e-bikes, such as those offered by Lime and I guess also by Forest, its eco-rival.
Would they be replacing car bays?
Yes, well, there are a number of bike parking bays already across London, depending on the boroughs, and actually sort of designate space, mark them out often with lines, not quite yellow lines, but they'll say bike parking. You see some in the City of London, some in Hackney, and so on. It really varies borough to borough. But the idea is that more boroughs can bid for this money to convert on-street car parking to space for bikes. And rather than having one SUV Jeep taking up quite a lot of space, you could probably get about 15 Lime bikes, and that's the whole idea. The wider aim is that more Londoners get on a bike, get on an e-bike, rather than getting in the front seat of a car or the back seat.
And this is all part of a big push to get more Londoners onto two wheels. And there was an interesting line in your report today, this suggestion that, could London become another Amsterdam? So what do you think about this? Do we have A, the infrastructure, and B, the mindset?
I think that we're getting there on the first one. The number of cycle lanes, especially protected cycle lanes, has increased over the past 8 or 9 years with Sadiq Khan being mayor. Boris Johnson got this going, and it's still probably his finest achievement, many would say, is the cycle superhighway along the Victoria Embankment. A sort of glorious ride, especially if the weather is nice. Sadiq has added bits and bobs here and there. The network is around, I think, 360 kilometres now. Not all of it is segregated, but most of it is pretty decent. But in terms of mentality, I think you're essentially touching on the key issue here. I think many continental cities have a more gentler approach to cycling. In London, there can be many people in much of a hurry, which can make even cycle lanes, if not certainly the roads, terribly pleasant for younger cyclists, for those who are not in a race and not in a hurry and don't want to get sort of barged off the bike or face something coming at them at speed on another set of wheels.
You did ask Wayne Ting regarding a rather famous Lime bike member and potential repercussions, financial repercussions for this Hollywood star. Pick up the story, if you would.
This was the year of the Bob Dylan biopic, A Complete Unknown, when it was held at the South Bank a week or two ago. And the star, the man who played Bob Dylan himself, Timothy Chalamet, turned up on a Lime bike, caused much of a sort of sensation, got the paparazzi into a right old flap, and the pictures went round the world. It then transpired, according to Chalamet, when he was speaking to French telly the next day, that he had been fined, apparently by Lime, because he hadn't parked his bike in the correct space. Now, this is disputed by Lime because Chalamet talked about being fined £65. Now, Lime say that in London, their fines range from £2 to £20, and also first offenders are not fined. Now, the chief executive didn't want to be specific about this because it seems it's still a bit of a mystery exactly what happened. The sense is that perhaps there was some artistic license being used by this Hollywood heartthrob talking about his Lime bike ride. But what Wayne Ting did say was that just as Dylan went electric, as portrayed in the film, it was great that Timothy also went electric, went on his e-bike rather than getting in a limousine, and this is the way that all stars should travel.
And that's The Standard. For the latest news, head over to standard.co.uk. This podcast is